Arrogant billionaire, forced to marry his uncle's plain daughter, but her kindness broke his walls. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. Rain poured down the glass walls of Vale Tower like endless silver strings, blurring the view of Manhattan's skyline. Inside the top-floor office, the air was sharp with tension. A single pen rolled across the mahogany desk before stopping near a thick envelope stamped with a family seal. Ethan Vale sat behind the desk, his jaw tight, his expression colder than the rain outside. At 32, he was known for two things: his impossible wealth and his impossible pride. Across from him, his uncle, Rupert Vale, watched calmly, hands folded around a gold cane. The old man's voice was steady, every word calculated. "Your father's will is clear, Ethan," Rupert said. "You must marry within the family to retain the controlling shares of Vale Group. Otherwise, it all returns to the family trust and to me." Ethan's lips curved in a bitter half-smile. "So this is your game, Uncle. You want to own the company my father built." Rupert leaned forward slightly. "I do not need to steal it. The law will hand it to me. But there is another way. Marry my daughter, Lila. Keep your empire. Keep your pride. Everyone wins." Ethan's laugh was short and sharp. "The quiet girl who hides behind her sketchbook? The one you call a disappointment at every dinner? You must be joking." But Rupert did not blink. "I am not joking, Ethan. The board meets in 10 days. If you are still single by then, Vale Group is mine." Thunder rumbled across the city. For a long moment, Ethan said nothing. His eyes flicked to the framed photo of his late father on the wall, the man who had taught him to fight for everything and trust no one. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "Fine. If a marriage is what it takes to protect my father's legacy, then I will do it." Rupert's smile was small and satisfied. "Good choice, my boy. The wedding contract is ready." He opened the folder and pushed it across the desk. A diamond ring in a velvet box glimmered beside it, catching the lightning that flashed outside. Ethan stared at both. He felt nothing, no fear, no affection, only the weight of obligation. He signed his name in a single, precise motion. Later that night, when the city had gone quiet and the rain had turned to mist, Ethan stood by the window of his penthouse, staring at the signature drying on the page. Somewhere across town, in a modest art classroom, Lila Vale was cleaning paintbrushes, unaware that her life had just been rewritten. She was 26, soft-spoken, the kind of woman who smiled at strangers and carried sketchbooks instead of handbags. Her students adored her, though the world rarely noticed her. As thunder rolled again, she received a call she never expected. The housekeeper's trembling voice echoed through the phone. "Miss Lila, your father has arranged something. You are to be married. Tomorrow." The brush slipped from her hand, landing in the paint water with a soft splash. "Married? To whom?" she whispered. The answer came like a ghost through the static. "To Ethan Vale." And as the rain began to fall harder outside her classroom window, both their fates, one forged by pride, the other by duty, quietly collided. Neither of them knew that this forced marriage would be the one thing powerful enough to break his walls and reveal her strength. The morning of the wedding arrived gray and cold, the kind of day that made even the city seem unsure of itself. At the Vale estate, preparations moved like clockwork, florists arranging white lilies, servers adjusting silver trays, cameras already waiting by the grand staircase. Ethan Vale stood in front of the mirror in his tailored black suit, his reflection crisp and emotionless. The tie felt too tight, though he had worn hundreds before. For a moment, he thought of his father again, the voice that used to say, "Power means nothing without honor." He pushed the memory away. This was not about honor. This was survival. When the doors opened, the small crowd of family and board members turned their eyes to Lila. She walked slowly, her steps measured, her white dress simple, modest, and far from the extravagance expected of a billionaire's bride. Yet there was something about her calmness that silenced the whispers. Her eyes met his only once, steady and unreadable. The ceremony was brief. No music, no vows beyond the legal ones. When the officiant declared them husband and wife, Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger as if signing another contract. She whispered, "Thank you," though she was not sure why. Later, in the car, silence stretched between them like glass. The rain had started again, pattering softly against the tinted windows. Lila finally spoke. "So this is it," she said quietly. "We are married." Ethan's eyes stayed on the road ahead. "You will have everything you need. A separate room, a driver. Do not expect more." "I never did," she replied, folding her hands in her lap. When they reached his penthouse, she paused in the doorway, taking in the view the endless city lights, the cold perfection of marble floors, the art that looked more like investments than memories. He gestured toward the guest room. "That is yours. Dinner is at 7. The staff will handle everything." Then he disappeared into his office. That night, she sat alone by the window, sketchbook open on her knees. The city glowed beneath her, a million lives moving while hers felt frozen. She began to draw a teacup, steam curling into the air. It was something she always painted when she needed calm. She titled it Patience. In the next room, Ethan stood by his desk, glass of whiskey in hand. Through the half-open door, he could see her sketching, lost in her world. Something about her stillness unsettled him. She did not complain, did not cry, did not try to please him. She simply existed, quietly. He turned away, telling himself it did not matter. But later, when he walked past her door and saw the small light still on, he hesitated. Her drawing lay on the table, unfinished, the lines delicate and precise. Beneath it, a note written in soft handwriting. "Kindness is not weakness, it is a choice." He stared at the words longer than he intended. For the first time, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, this woman he had been forced to marry was not as plain as he had believed. Outside, the rain eased into silence, and somewhere deep within Ethan Vale's guarded heart, something shifted just enough for the first crack of light to get through. The following week passed like a quiet storm, each day polite, distant, and perfectly rehearsed. Ethan spent his mornings buried in meetings, his afternoons with lawyers, and his evenings locked in his study. Lila, meanwhile, learned to live among walls that did not belong to her. Every morning she brewed tea and left a cup outside his office. He never drank it, but she kept leaving it anyway. It was not obligation, it was habit, the kind born of kindness too small to notice. The staff watched her with curiosity. She always thanked them by name, something no one in that penthouse had done before. One evening, while preparing for a business dinner, Ethan entered the living room to find Lila sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by color palettes and stacks of magazines. She looked up, startled. "I am sorry," she said quickly. "I was just planning decorations for the charity gala. Your company is hosting next week." The theme felt a little sterile. "No," Ethan frowned. "That event is not your concern." "I know," she replied, lifting one of the sketches. "But if we want people to donate, they need to feel something. People do not give to perfection, they give to connection." He should have dismissed her. Instead, he took the paper from her hand. It was a layout of soft light and warm tones, far simpler than what his marketing team had designed and somehow more human. "You think you can do better than the professionals?" he asked. "I think I can help," she answered. That night, he did not throw her ideas away. He sent them to his event planner with a short message. "Try this." Days later, the gala arrived. The ballroom glowed golden, filled with music, laughter, and faces that always smiled too wide. Ethan stood near the stage, polished and detached. Then he noticed something unusual. People were actually talking about the art displays, the stories behind each donation photo. The setup looked exactly like Lila's sketch. When she entered the room, wearing a simple navy dress that caught the light just enough, heads turned. She did not look like the plain girl he remembered from their first meeting. She looked calm, assured, quietly radiant. Midway through the event, an older investor made a cruel joke within earshot. "So this is the famous Mrs. Vale? I expected someone taller, at least." Lila smiled politely. "Then it is good. I am not what you expected," she said, raising her glass. "Surprises keep life interesting." Laughter rippled across the table, gentle but real. Ethan watched her handle the moment with grace he could never have faked. For the first time in years, pride felt like something other than armor. Later that night, when the last guest had left and the lights dimmed, he found her alone near the balcony, looking out at the skyline. "You did well tonight," he said. She turned, startled. "Thank you. It was your event. No, he said quietly, his eyes on the city below. Tonight, it was yours. For a moment, they stood side by side in silence, the distance between them smaller than it had ever been. Outside, the city lights flickered like tiny truths waiting to be seen, and Ethan realized something he had not in a long time: he no longer wanted to be alone. The days following the gala carried a strange new rhythm inside the Vale penthouse. The air felt lighter, as if the silence that once filled the rooms had learned how to breathe. Ethan still worked long hours, but now, every morning, he found the cup of tea Lila left outside his office, mysteriously warm instead of cold. Sometimes, he even drank it. One afternoon, he returned home earlier than usual. The sound of faint music floated from the sitting room's soft piano notes, mixed with the scratch of a pencil on paper. Lila was at her easel, sketching the city skyline through the rain-streaked window. Her hair was pulled into a loose knot, her sleeves rolled up, smudges of graphite marking her wrist. He stood quietly for a moment before speaking. You paint what you see or what you feel? She smiled without turning. What I wish was still beautiful. He stepped closer. And what is that today? She paused, the pencil hovering in the air. A man trying to remember how to be kind. Ethan did not answer. Instead, he watched her draw each line patient, deliberate. Something about her gentleness disarmed him more than any confrontation ever could. That evening, over dinner, she mentioned her students from the art school she had once taught at before the marriage. They were bright kids, she said, but the funding was cut. The building will close next month. Ethan looked up from his glass. You still think about that place? It mattered, she said simply. It gave them hope, and hope is not something children should have to fight for. He said nothing. But later that night, while Lila slept, he sent an email to his assistant instructing a quiet donation under her name. He told himself it was a business expense, nothing more. The next morning, Lila burst into his office, her eyes wide. Did you do this? She asked, holding a printed letter of gratitude from the school. Ethan glanced at it, pretending to focus on his laptop. Vale Group funds several charities. Maybe one of them decided to help. She tilted her head, smiling knowingly. You are a terrible liar. He exhaled, almost laughing. You are impossible. And you are not as heartless as you want people to think, she replied softly. For a moment, they just looked at each other, two strangers bound by a contract, slowly learning to speak the same language. That evening, when he walked her to her room, he hesitated by the door. You do not have to stay here if you do not want to, he said. She shook her head. This is where I am supposed to be. For now. When he returned to his own room, he noticed the painting she had left leaning against his door. It was unfinished, like most of her work, but he recognized himself in it standing in the rain, holding an umbrella over someone else, while his own shoulders were soaked. He traced the outline of the figure with his thumb. For the first time in his life, Ethan Vale felt something he could not label. It was not love yet, but it was dangerously close, like the moment before lightning touches the ground. Outside, the rain began to fall again, soft and steady, washing the glass clean, as if preparing for whatever came next. A week later, the Vale Foundation hosted its annual board dinner, a grand event that filled an entire ballroom with wealth, ambition, and sharp smiles. Ethan had always treated these nights like a battlefield numbers, handshakes, silent wars disguised as toasts. But this time, something felt different. Lila arrived beside him, wearing an elegant silver dress that shimmered softly beneath the chandeliers. It was not extravagant, but it suited her perfectly. As the cameras flashed, Ethan noticed how calmly she moved through the crowd. She did not pretend to belong, nor did she shrink from it. She was simply herself, and that was enough to draw every eye in the room. Rupert Vale, his uncle, approached them with the same sly grin that had haunted Ethan since childhood. "Nephew," he said, clasping his shoulder, "you have surprised me. The press is fascinated. Seems your little marriage was not such a bad idea after all." Ethan's tone stayed polite, but his jaw tightened. "It was not a performance, Uncle. It was an agreement." Rupert chuckled. "Of course. Still, make sure the performance continues." Investors love a fairy tale. When Rupert turned to Lila, his expression softened into something falsely warm. "My dear, you are learning quickly. But remember, this world does not reward softness." Lila met his gaze steadily. Then I will change the rules. Rupert's smile faltered for just a second, and Ethan noticed. Later that evening, the dinner shifted into its most uncomfortable phase. Open questions from the board and press. One reporter raised her hand. Mr. Vale, people are calling this marriage a strategic move to secure family control. What do you say to that? The room fell silent. Cameras pointed at Ethan. His pulse thudded once, sharp and loud. Before he could answer, Lila stepped forward. Our marriage began as an arrangement, she said calmly. We will not deny that, but arrangements can still grow into understanding. The truth is, a company that builds its empire on fear will fall. A company that remembers compassion will last. Her voice carried through the hall. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then applause began at the far end of the table, soft but real. Ethan looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not the quiet woman he had underestimated, but someone capable of standing taller than any of them. When the event ended, they rode home in silence. The city lights flickered across her face as she looked out the window. I hope I did not embarrass you, she said softly. Ethan turned toward her. You did the opposite. Back at the penthouse, he poured her a cup of tea and handed it to her instead of leaving it on his desk like before. You always make tea for me, he said. I thought I should return the favor. She smiled, cradling the cup in both hands. So you do listen. More than you think, he replied. For a long time, they sat together without words, the steam rising between them like a fragile peace. Outside, the city roared with life. But inside that quiet penthouse, something had finally begun to change. Neither of them realized that this fragile warmth would soon be tested, that the same kindness that softened Ethan's heart was about to be used against them by the very man who had forced their marriage. The next few days unfolded like a calm before a storm. The city buzzed with news of the gala speech, calling Lila Vale the quiet woman who stole the spotlight. Magazines praised her grace, and social media flooded with photos of her standing beside Ethan, both of them looking like a real couple. Inside the penthouse, however, life was slower, gentler. Ethan no longer hid behind his office door. Sometimes he joined her for breakfast. Other times, he lingered by the window, watching her paint. He began to notice small things he had never paid attention to before: the way she hummed softly while mixing colors, the way her laughter seemed to loosen the air. One evening, as rain tapped against the glass, Lila found Ethan on the rooftop terrace, staring at the skyline. The wind carried the smell of rain and city lights. You will catch a cold, she said, wrapping her cardigan tighter. He smiled faintly. I have been through worse. Still, you do not have to face it alone, she replied. He turned toward her. For a long moment, they stood under the drizzle, silent but not uncomfortable. Then he spoke quietly, almost to himself. My father used to say that love makes men weak. I believed him. I built everything around that belief. But now I am not sure he was right. Lila's eyes softened. Maybe love does not make you weak. Maybe it just reminds you that you are human. No. The words stayed with him long after she went inside. That night, he could not sleep. He walked through the halls, passing the paintings she had hung to make the house feel less empty. On the wall outside her room, one painting caught his attention. It was the same unfinished portrait she had given him, now complete. The man in the rain held an umbrella over someone else. But this time, there was light breaking through the clouds. He stood there for a long time, realizing that somewhere along the way, this woman had changed everything he thought he knew about strength. The next morning, Ethan decided to show her a different side of his world. He invited her to visit Vale Group's headquarters. You should see where all the chaos begins, he said, half joking. Lila followed him through glass corridors and endless rows of employees who looked both nervous and curious. For the first time, Ethan introduced her not as Mrs. Vale, but as my wife, Lila. The small shift in his tone did not go unnoticed. During a meeting, she quietly suggested an idea for an art scholarship program, something to help underprivileged students who could not afford education. The board looked skeptical until Ethan said, "Approve it, effective immediately." After the meeting, she smiled at him. "You did not have to do that." "I wanted to," he answered simply. "You keep reminding me what this company is supposed to stand for." That evening, as they left the office, a photographer shouted from across the street, "Mr. Vale, is it true you are actually in love with your wife?" Ethan did not flinch. He glanced at Lila, her cheeks flushed from embarrassment, and then replied loud enough for the cameras to hear. "It is true that she makes me a better man." The flashbulbs went wild, and Lila looked at him, half shocked, half smiling. But not everyone shared that smile. From the shadows across the street, Rupert Vale watched them enter the car. His expression was unreadable, his hand tightening around the head of his gold cane. Under the glitter of city lights, he whispered to himself, "So the boy forgot the rules. Let us see how far love can protect him." The storm that had been waiting behind every kindness was finally about to break. The next morning began like any other, but the peace did not last. Ethan arrived at Vale Group's headquarters to find reporters swarming outside and security struggling to hold them back. Flashbulbs burst as he stepped out of his car. Questions shouted from every direction filled the air like static. "Mr. Vale, is it true your marriage was staged to secure inheritance? Did your wife know about the contract? Are you divorcing now that your shares are safe?" Ethan froze. A journalist held up a glossy magazine cover with a headline in bold: "The Fake Marriage of Ethan Vale Inside His Family's Secret Deal." Underneath was a photo of him and Lila from the gala, her gentle smile twisted into something manipulative by the camera's angle. Inside the office, chaos spread through the boardroom. His uncle, Rupert, sat at the head of the table, pretending shock and disappointment. "You brought this on yourself, nephew," he said smoothly. "You should have kept your private life out of the headlines." Ethan's voice was cold. "You leaked it." Rupert tilted his head. "Why would I do that? I'm only trying to protect the family's reputation." Ethan slammed the magazine on the table. "You did this to destroy mine." "Perhaps," Rupert said, his smirk sharp as glass. "The board cannot tolerate scandals. They will vote to suspend your authority until this blows over. Maybe then you will remember where real power lies." No. Back at the penthouse, Lila watched the same story unravel on television, her hands trembling. Every network replayed the same narrative: the billionaire's arranged marriage, the poor girl who played along. She felt her stomach twist, not from shame but from heartbreak. When Ethan arrived home hours later, she met him in the foyer, holding the magazine. "Is it true?" she asked quietly. "Did you really agree to marry me just to keep your company?" He looked exhausted, his tie undone, his eyes shadowed. "Yes, but that was before I knew you." Her voice broke. "But that does not erase what came before, does it?" He stepped closer, but she backed away. "Lila, I swear, I did not leak this. My uncle, he wanted to humiliate us." "Us?" she whispered. "No, Ethan. You wanted to protect your name. I was never part of that world." She placed her wedding ring on the table. It landed with a soft, final sound. "I will not be a contract anyone uses again." Before he could stop her, she walked out into the rain, the same kind of storm that had begun their story. That night, the penthouse felt emptier than ever. Ethan sat alone in his office, the cup of tea she used to leave untouched, now cold beside him. On the desk lay her sketchbook, left open to a drawing she had been working on the night before, a bridge across a stormy sky, one side unfinished. Beneath it, a line written in her neat handwriting: "You cannot build love with walls, only with trust." He read the words until they blurred. For the first time, Ethan Vale did not reach for control. He simply sat there, staring at what he had lost. Across the city, Lila checked into a small art residency program under a different name. She taught children how to mix colors, how to find beauty in imperfection. But each time she looked at the rain against the window, she thought of him. And somewhere in his high-rise office, Ethan finally began to understand the one truth: money could never buy the courage to say sorry. 2 weeks passed, and the storm around Ethan Vale refused to fade. The news cycle had turned his name into a weapon, and Vale Group's stock slipped lower each day. Rupert Vale moved quickly, pressing the board for an emergency vote to remove Ethan as CEO. The empire that had taken decades to build was collapsing brick by brick, headline by headline. But Ethan did not fight back with lawyers or press conferences. Instead, he disappeared from the spotlight. He stopped attending meetings and stopped giving interviews. People whispered that the proud billionaire had finally broken. They were wrong. He was rebuilding, but not his company, himself. Every night, he walked through the empty penthouse where Lila's laughter once lived. Her sketches still hung on the walls. Each one felt like a mirror showing what he had refused to see. For the first time, Ethan did not drown his guilt in whiskey. He sat with it. He read her words again and again. You cannot build love with walls. Then one morning, he found the courage to act. He called his assistant. "Find the best charity auction in the city. I want to sponsor it. But this time, it is not for Vale Group." "What name should I use?" the assistant asked. Ethan looked out at the skyline. "Use hers, Lila Vale." 3 days later, the event took place at a downtown art gallery, the same one that had once rejected Lila's work. The marquee outside glowed. "The Art of Kindness, a charity auction, curated by Lila Vale." Every painting inside was donated anonymously, but Ethan recognized them all. They were hers. He had collected them over time: sketches she had thrown away, unfinished canvases she had abandoned in the studio. When Lila arrived that night, she thought it was a coincidence that her name was on the banner. Then she saw him. Ethan stood at the center of the gallery, dressed simply. No photographers, no guards, just a man waiting. He stepped forward, voice low but steady. "These are your works. I wanted the world to see what I almost destroyed." She looked around, speechless. "Why would you do this?" "Because I owe you more than words. I owe you the truth. I married you for business. I stayed because I found something real. But I was too proud to say it before it was too late." He gestured toward the painting at the front, a new piece she had never seen before. It was a large canvas of a teacup under soft light, titled Grace. Beneath it, a plaque read, "For the woman who taught me kindness." The crowd fell silent. Lila's eyes filled with tears. "You remembered," she whispered. "I never forgot," he said, "and if you can find it in your heart to forgive me, I will spend the rest of my life proving I deserve it." As the auctioneer raised the gavel, Ethan lifted his hand. $5 million for Grace. Gasps spread through the room. The hammer struck. Sold. The audience erupted in applause, but Ethan only looked at her. She could see it in his eyes. This was not about money anymore. It was about redemption. Slowly, Lila stepped toward him. Her hand trembled, but she placed it over his heart. "You finally learned what love costs," she said softly. "And you paid it the only way that mattered." For the first time since the scandal, Ethan smiled not as a billionaire or a CEO, but as a man who had finally found peace. Outside, the rain that had followed them for so long began to fade, replaced by a clear night sky over the city that had witnessed their story from pride to forgiveness, from contract to love. The morning after the auction, the city woke to headlines that no one expected. Billionaire Ethan Vale buys his wife's art for $5 million and wins back more than his reputation. But for once, Ethan did not care about what the world said. For the first time, every word printed about him carried no power compared to the quiet truth that had finally found its way home. A few days later, Lila returned to the penthouse, not as a guest, not as a contract, but as herself. The staff greeted her with genuine smiles. The air no longer felt heavy with silence. The house had life again. Ethan met her at the door, holding something small in his hand, a folded piece of paper and the ring she had left behind. "I never asked you properly," he said softly. "I made you a deal once, not a promise. Let me fix that." Lila looked at him, her eyes cautious yet tender. "You do not owe me anything, Ethan." He shook his head. "I owe you everything. You showed me what my father never did, that strength is not control, it is compassion. So this time, I am not offering a contract." He unfolded the paper. Inside was a handwritten vow. To choose kindness over pride, to build not empires but moments, to love without conditions. Her lips trembled as she read it. "You wrote this?" He smiled faintly. "Every night since you left." "No." She slipped the ring back on her finger, not because of diamonds or wealth, but because this time it meant something real. "Then I will say yes," she whispered. Weeks turned into months. Vale Group slowly regained its footing, not through power plays or publicity, but through the quiet strength of change. Ethan stepped down from his CEO role and created the Grace Foundation, named after the painting that had healed them both. The foundation funded art programs and scholarships for children who could not afford education, the same dream Lila once spoke of at their dinner table. At the grand opening ceremony, Ethan stood beside her, the crowd applauding as he spoke simply. "This foundation exists because of a woman who taught me that love is not weakness. It is the only kind of wealth worth keeping." Lila reached for his hand, her fingers interlacing with his. They smiled at each other, not like people trying to prove something to the world, but like two souls who had already found what they were searching for. That evening, They returned home to the rooftop terrace where everything had once begun. The city lights shimmered below them, and the sky above stretched clear and endless. Lila poured 2 cups of tea and handed one to him. He raised his cup slightly. "To contracts broken," he said. She laughed softly. "And to hearts mended." Then they stood together in the quiet, the sound of the city humming below. For the first time, there was no rain, no storm, only calm. Ethan placed his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "You once said kindness is a choice," he murmured. "I finally understand. It is the hardest, most beautiful choice there is." Lila smiled, resting her head against him. "Then keep choosing it, every day." Nah. As the lights of Manhattan glowed around them, the story of the arrogant billionaire and the plain girl found its final truth not in money or status, but in grace. Because in the end, it was not a contract that bound them. It was love, the kind that rebuilds everything it touches.